Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, we have Sacha Awwa. Sacha, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I put a little extra mustard on the name because it just sounds cool, I guess. So thank you for coming on, first of all. And I was excited to have this conversation with you because similar to myself, you have a couple decades worth of experience here. So it'll be fun to kind of talk through some of this from your perspective, being that over the last 20 years, the way things have evolved, changed, and even most recently with AI, we've kind of seen a lot of different variations of marketing and where people are focusing and kind of adjusting their strategies to kind of stay in step with all these evolutions. So that said, what are your thoughts on that, and what's like been the big change for you in your career?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and a very valid point in terms of how things are changing and how things are, I think marketing has always moved at a mile a minute, and I think it continues to do so, and even more so. I don't know if you've realized this, but even just being on Instagram, which is part of our jobs, on all of our social channels, the bombardment of all of these new AI platforms that are coming out, it's just a new one every couple of days or a new one every week. So if we as marketers feel overwhelmed, I can only imagine how business owners who are also getting hit with these type of marketing approaches, how they feel in terms of where do I start? How do I get going? Who do I contact? Where do I go? And I think the space is already overwhelming. And I think it's becoming even more overwhelming with the added layer of AI. I mean, AI has been there for a while, but now it's just kind of flooding the market like at an insane pace. So I think that, at least like how I practice in terms of like working with my clients, it's kind of calming down the noise and figuring out, where do you start? How do you jump in? And I think, with podcasts like these to kind of help them navigate the craziness and the ocean of like what marketing is and where to start is really, where to begin. But one of the biggest changes that I've noticed, even with AI and its platform, is that, you and I have been in the industry for so long, and, digital kind of had its boom. Digital is still booming. But I think one of the biggest things, especially after COVID, that really took place was the sense of community and the sense of trust. And a lot of the times when I work with my clients, it's really reverting back to hitting the streets and really going back to, I think, what Red Bull kind of did and kind of really coined in an amazing way, which they brought field marketers back where, people back in the days used to go and knock on people's doors and said, hey, do you want a refrigerator or do you want an AC unit and that kind of stuff. And I think still the handshake is extremely important to familiarize potential prospects, customers, if you aren't necessarily like an e-commerce business, but to really get that referral stream going. And I think that it can work across the board, even if you are e-commerce, just to get involved within communities, understand like where your target audience is and like how to reach them, because that's the only variable that is different from industry to industry is your target audience and how to find them. But community is something that I still think, even though as crazy as digital is moving and AI is making it even faster, there is the sense of longing to get back to that sense of community, building that trust with that brand, building that affinity with that brand, and then really kind of, connecting and keep coming back to purchase products and services and so on.
Yeah, I would even say that I don't know that it ever really went away. It's just, I think people got, it was the shiny new toy, like when social media came into existence and people started going viral, and all of a sudden, like, I think they just kind of took their eye off the fundamental and traditional ways to market people.
I agree.
And I don't know that a lot of that's necessarily changed. I think it's just dropped in priority and it kind of got lost in the hype of everything else. But what's important, I think, for clients to understand, and you touched on it a little bit, is that these are all tools to be leveraged. It's hard as a small business or even a niche business in a certain industry. You can't necessarily jump in like Coca-Cola or jump in like Nike, or like, you got to kind of look at it and deconstruct it in a way that fits your brand, fits your model, fits your industry. And with that, where are those gaps where traditional marketing can still apply?
Yeah, I completely agree. And you're so right about like jumping in like a Coca-Cola or some of these big brands. I mean, I used to work at the New York Times and we had very little budget. So even some of these like larger enterprise companies, I mean, being that media is obviously different to Coca-Cola, but it was coming from, working in an advertising agency where we had government contracts like the Army National Guard, and it was like, spend it or lose it before the end of a certain time, right? And then at the New York Times, they were like, well, here's $500. We need to fill seats. And I'm like, what am I going to do with $500? So it's really going back to, and it's fun because it's being able to squeeze out as much as you can and really kind of think outside the box. Like, yeah, how do I really get, and to your point, like the sense of community, how do I get in touch with, maybe if we have an event going on and I have $500, like maybe it's finding universities, how do I get on their lists, or, different organizations that, could potentially see interest in the conversation and so on, and being able to spend less to get more.
Yeah. And with all that, I think right now is an interesting time because you have this tool or this animal to be leveraged, so to speak, in AI. You have social media, you have data, enough data to choke a horse. Like you've got a lot of different things to work with in all that. And as you're building a company and helping clients understand what that journey looks like, where in the priority of things do you put a brand's identity, a brand's story? Like, how do you help them kind of make sure that doesn't lose its place in the process?
Yeah, so I have sort of developed a three-prong process, like phase one, phase two, phase three. And within phase one, that's where I really build out like a company's foundation, or I take them back if they've been in business for X amount of years to go back to that foundation. And phase one really is about ensuring your house is in order. Like I mentioned, your content in a good place? Is your website in a good place? Do you have all your marketing tech stack tools connected and funneling through so you're able to track lead form all the way to sale and so on and so forth? So I really develop, and kind of take a look back as, how are you communicating your brand across your social accounts, your website, anywhere that you have a presence publicly. And, a lot of the times what we find is that the message is different everywhere because they may have started their website at one point. Then they're like, oh, let's, start Instagram. And that's like a 6-month later process. And so then they've already gone through the business, dips and highs. And they're like, oh, well, let's say this instead. But then they didn't figure to go back and change it on the website. So then you're ultimately confusing your audience, or, it's like I heard somebody say, like you're making them burn so many calories to figure out what they're doing mentally, right? And so it's the concept that I always like to say, like if you're a bike shop, just say you sell bikes. Don't tell them you sell the wind that blows through their hair and try to come up with this magnificent like headline on the website, because you're just going to continue to further confuse. So it's going back to the drawing board, figuring out like the 4 whys, as I like to call them, like your who, why, what, and way. So it's like the way is like, how you do what you do, right? And then it's really, understanding, is your mission, your vision, is it still the same from when you guys first started and, launched? And if it's not, let's go back and figuring out what those are. And I love doing like a 3-10-30. So like a 3-second, 10-second, and 30-second build out, because it really kind of squeezes you into like what we used to call it, the New York Times, like what is that single most selling message? If somebody said, hey, what do you do? What is the one sentence you can say about the business? Because if it takes you a while to figure out to put it in one sentence, then there's a fundamental problem. Like we need to figure out the most simplified and drilled down way of speaking about what you're offering to be able to then take that and deliver it across the board. So that always has to happen. And a lot of the times when marketing either plateaus, it doesn't necessarily plummet. It either, with companies that have been in business, it will either plateau or it will kind of just stay stagnant, which is the same thing, I guess. But that's when we do go back to phase one and to like re-engineer and reconfigure like your messaging and what's going on with that process to then move forward. Because why would you be spending money and just shooting, bullets in the dark to, convert when you're not going to get any type of conversion at that point?
Yeah. And a couple things you mentioned there that I want to expand on one thing and just add to another. But to add on a little bit, I think the part that people forget, and you talked about it, like you start with the who you are kind of piece.
Yeah.
people forget to put themselves into it. And I know it's an overused word right now, but it's a good word.
Yeah.
The authenticity piece. Like if it's your brand and it's your mission and it's cultivated from somewhere inside you and the experiences you've had, or it's the vision you have for your business or your company, you got to start on the inside and work outwards to make sure that that exists in your plan.
Yeah.
And then it's super easy to come back to, because you know who you are and what you are and all those things. So
Yeah.
when the market shifts or something doesn't go the way you hope it would, the calibration point is you. So you get to come back to that really quick without having to rethink, well, now who am I and how does that work? Because I think sometimes we watch competition and we watch the industry and we feel like we have to mimic them. We feel like we have to follow them. We feel like we have to become a version of them in order to get on that track that's successful. And sure, find inspiration there. Watch competition. I'm not saying don't.
Yeah.
But if it starts with you, it's a really pure place to come back to anytime you need to. And
I totally agree.
it's really important. And I think people forget that.
Yeah. And I don't think, yes, we hear a lot about like authenticity, but I think at the end of the day, it is the core of like a business. I mean, so the other day I was like listening to this podcast and, they were talking about how I have all these amazing photo shoots that are coming up. And the crazy thing is that I know as I'm sitting here doing this photo shoot, that it's not gonna gain the kind of engagement as if I was to just take my phone and say, hey guys, I just woke up in the morning, et cetera, and kind of be your true authentic self. And this person was like, I get so much more engagement when I do that. And it's like, I work with a startup where they're doing some amazing things for the music industry. And they're these two older guys. And I was like, we got to put you guys in front facing. Like you can't hide behind the scenes. People want to know, who are these people that started this company? And they're like, well, nobody's going to resonate with us. We're like in our 50s and like so on and so forth. And I was like, no. And I was like, they want to, because you've gone through the grit, you've gone through the grind of the music industry and you know what it takes. It's the blood, sweat, and tears, and you can help these people. And that's what you are doing. And so I'm like, it's extremely important. So there's also like a psychological push, I think, when it comes to a lot of like the clients that we work with and getting them out of their comfort zone.
I think that comes with, because I run into this as well. I think people have this expectation, or they think to do that comes with this commercial polish. Like I'm not commercially polished enough to be that front man. And it's like, well, actually, we don't want you to be commercially polished or be a version of what you think people want. I want to be what you are, and then attract the people that resonate and relate to you specifically, because you don't necessarily have to be the world's best speaker. You don't have to be, it's your story, it's your journey, it's your kind of your path on how your experiences all added up to this point where you started X, Y, and Z business. That's what people resonate with. And that's the part that's inspiring, because it's relatable. Yeah. But I think they think like, I don't have this Kardashian thing about me. Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think like why, like someone like Tony Robbins, who does so well, is because he really breaks things down for people, and I think it's like, until you get on stage, or like until you can really connect, and it's not even about the stage, it's even the communication, like you said, as you have like on your website and your social channels and the content that you're putting out there. And it is crazy. Like I always tell my clients, 80% is good versus never getting it out, than to like kind of beat a dead horse to get to 100% and then get it out. Because, like we talked about startups, it's hard because in the beginning, they're trying to find product market fit, right? And we as marketers have this canvas of, this is how like best in practice websites are built. But it's like, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have iterations of that canvas to be able to see what is actually working for that particular audience. Because even if we have a website that worked for a similar audience, it may not work similarly for that particular company within the same industry. And that's where like the whole like testing and learning like keeps coming in. And, I think that's the educational part that we as marketers have to remind them, like, it's not out the gate you're going to be selling instantaneously,
Yeah. And I encourage clients to, if you listen to my podcast, you'll hear me talk about 80-20 all the time, but I
Yeah.
encourage my clients to like, just shoot for 80. If you
Yeah.
can be 80% solid, well kept, well thought out, like that's a really consistently good place to be. And then if you go above 80 and give yourself a little wiggle room to evolve and change with the industry. I mean, you can always go to 90, go to 100, but to have this idea that you always want to hit 100, you'll never get off the starting block because
Yeah.
there's just too much stuff to do. There's too much thought that goes into some of this stuff. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Totally.
important. But
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to build a business, and to your point, I don't think people realize what goes into marketing, and sometimes when I was working in-house and I'm like, marketing is really the heartbeat of the company. And of course, sales didn't love to hear that,
right.
but I mean, it is really the engine that churns and keep things moving and like the whole, like then the feedback from like the sales back to like, from in B2B and so on and so forth. I mean, but yeah, I mean, they just think it's a button and, leads just flow in and it's not necessarily all of that simplistic.
Right. And you have to live through it. But what we see a lot of the times too is once they live through it, they get 6 months, 12 months into it.
Yeah.
They start to have a confidence about it because it's like, man, I kind of understand what's going on. I kind of know who my customer is. I know
exactly.
Like they start to get a feel for what it's all about. And then they even get more strategic. They get more fired up. They get more like, I don't like to say year 1, year 2, whatever, because clients go a year and they think, man, that's so far away. But it's like,
Yeah.
if you adopt a strategy and you build something like this with a company like ours, man, you get past that first year, you're just going to feel like a better business person. You're going to feel like you got a better pulse on everything.
Yeah.
And in reality, you do, but you got to get through that first wave where, everything's a question and bust through that white noise, like you said. Like,
Yeah.
if you listen to podcasts and you're watching social media and whatever, you're getting inundated with information and kind of quick fix type companies.
Yeah.
Not saying some of those things can't apply, but for the most part, it's commitment, it's time, it's data. Like if you can kind of come at it with a couple different strategies like that, like put my 80% together and in the 20% I'll investigate the quick fix. But
yeah.
If you can do that, you'll be in a much, much better place 12 to 18 months down the road.
I agree. And I like what you said in terms of when they understand it and then they've kind of walked a mile. And I feel like a lot of more of the clients that I'm bringing on want to know about marketing, like want to know what's behind the scenes. I mean, some of the best clients I have like pick up their own books and start reading and they're like, what about this? What about that? And all that kind of stuff. But it's great because it's like, they're kind of walking alongside you and the educational piece is there. And they're really like, they're really hands-on in the sense of like, not too hands-on where it's like, oh, let's read every like Twitter post that goes out, but at least they know what's going on in the background.
Right. Yeah. And I think they have a better sense of what's going on when things maybe don't go as planned.
Yeah.
That's huge because I think when they're young in their journey or they don't quite understand that they want to jump to panic. They want to like, this isn't working. And all of a sudden they're panicking, where I think kind of the seasoned clients, the ones who kind of understand, they get it that you need to pivot. It's more of a pivot point. It's more of a calibration point versus a panic point. So,
yep. I like that.
Yeah. So having 20 years in, let me ask you this. What advice would you give to a young professional aspiring to be in marketing? Like what specific skills, mindsets, how would you teach somebody to come into this industry with your 20 years of experience?
I think it's absorb everything. When I worked in-house and, I had some folks that worked in my team that came straight out of college, I had them shadow like everything I did from start to finish. And I wouldn't say like I'm a generalist, but I'm more like, I like to say I'm like the conductor to the symphony of like what marketing is. So it's like I have this 5,000 foot view where I'm dangerous enough to get behind the scenes and launch like social media campaigns. I know how to like, start up SEO. I know how to like, make changes on a website and so on and so forth. But I think it's two things. You're either really excited about one direction and one flow within marketing, or you're excited about the overall picture.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key things that I will say, no matter what you do, whether you become a social media creative person or whether you focus on SEO, the back piece that you always have to know that's going to make you 10 steps ahead of somebody who doesn't know this is the analytics and the data. And one of my clients who we hired and we brought on a social media person, and I said, I'm going to teach you how to read the analytics. I'm going to teach you not to just do these beautiful posts and to understand how to build a beautiful landscape of like Instagram feed, but I'm also going to teach you to understand what's working and what isn't. And the empowerment that I saw out of this kid that was 3 years out of college, came to us to build the social platform and is now helping us like with referrals and sitting in like larger companies that we would like to have partnerships with in boardrooms. And he's having a larger voice because he knows, on the back end, like what can work and what doesn't work. And I think that empowers anybody to be able to not just create beautiful things or not to do amazing social posts or social ads or build amazing websites, but it's like, what works and what doesn't work, and to really dig into the data. And that was one of the biggest things that I did in the meat of my career when I was working at the New York Times, was I aligned myself with the data science team. And I said, teach me your ways, teach me everything that you guys are doing, because I was giving a product that the Times wanted to sunset. And I let it survive because of the fact that I looked into the data to understand how people were coming to the website, how people were experiencing things. And you need to look at something from a 360-degree picture. And so it's never like a linear path. It's always, how are people click to purchase? What's the experience when they get it to their house? Or what's the onboarding? What's the communication and all of that? And it's almost like our job is never over, because it's the customer journey from end to end of somebody, getting to know you, purchasing, and then the post-purchase experience, and then becoming that brand evangelical that's going to basically like spread the word for you, So I think absorb as much as you can, but the biggest piece is know the data, because it's going to make you that much more stronger and presenting why you want to do things or why you want to change something up.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that I think is really important, I agree with everything you said, is you have to learn how to break it down and teach it.
Yeah.
Like you need to be able to communicate to the people around you, to the clients, to your, maybe it's to your boss, whatever. You need to be able to discuss the before, the during, and the after.
Totally.
Here's how it works. Here's why it did what it did, or here's what I think happened. Here's how we go forward. Because I'm with you. Like, I think being able to understand the data and really crunch the analytics, like, super important. But I run into so many young people who can't articulate it, or they can't break it down for the client to help kind of drag them through the process.
You're so right.
They just want the data to be the data. And it's like, I don't understand why the client doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. It's pretty clear why they don't get it, but you have to be able to break it down to them and help them. They're never going to be where you're at. True. But help them kind of digest it in ways where they understand that either A, it's working, or B, here's what we have to do to make it work.
Yeah.
It's huge.
I completely agree with that. That is almost number one. Thanks for bringing that up. And because I've been in many situations where in-house, we had a meeting every month where it was like, we had to walk the COO, the chief operating officer, and explain to him why marketing does what marketing does. Yeah. So it's knowing your audience, and it's knowing like how to pitch things. And I completely agree, because back in the days, 20 years ago, I was a graphic designer, and they wouldn't bring designers into meetings with clients. And so then there was, somebody that was pitching my work. That was an account manager, but account manager is not going to understand why I chose a certain color. And it's not because it looks pretty. There's obviously a reason behind it, Yeah. So, and back then, most graphic designers weren't client facing, but they are now.
And I think there's elements to, I don't love it, but I think there's elements to design, and it's all subjective anyway.
Yeah.
Like we have reasons why we do what we do, but if the client doesn't like it, okay. So you have to navigate that subjective aspect of it.
Yeah.
When it comes to analytics, it is what it is. This is why, this is what, the numbers are telling us. I think people have to own that. I think as young marketers, being able to, like you said, truly understand and read that, that data landscape.
Yeah.
But also now, how do I get the client and the people around me to understand, or at least articulate to them what it is that I'm seeing, so that I can build up my own authority. I can hopefully make smarter decisions with them, whatever it is. But I think that communication tool is huge. And I don't see that a lot. Not that those people don't exist, but I think it's such a fundamental skill that it needs to be kind of beaten into them. Like, you guys have to communicate, you have to teach, whether you like it or not. Like, this is a big animal that 99% of the audience or the customers are not going to be able to understand what you're saying.
You're so right.
So yeah. So tell me a little bit more about where we can find more information about your agency, about you, and the work that you guys do.
Yeah. So my agency is called SAMG. So it's just Sacha Awwa Marketing Group. And the URL is Sacha Awwa. So SACHAAWWA.com. So pretty straightforward. You guys can find me there. All of my services are listed there. We do everything end to end to support, client build out, whether you're just starting or whether you've been in business for X amount of years and you need optimization, as you talked about, Mike, uncovering where the gaps are, to really kind of supercharge their growth. And connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, I'd love to start a conversation. I'm always here to help.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. It was a great conversation, and we touched on a lot of good stuff, and I can really relate to a lot of the different things you talked about, having been in the industry for a long time. So
yeah, likewise.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Very much. Yep. If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and/or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.